RetroDaze.
When Friday finally rolled around and all the homework was done or slyly hidden at the bottom of your backpack for Monday morning, our kid brains often went into a state of overload. Our sensory input and neural circuitry would short out as we glitched in spasmotronic glee, considering a myriad of options before us.
What would Friday night hold this week? A trip to the mall? Hanging out at the roller rink? Gathering friends for a sleepover and movie marathon? The choices were as endless as our childhood seemed, but this particular Friday of yesteryear, you decided on hosting a game night. The only question was, what kind of game night? Would you play video games or board games? The answer came as quick as the flow of electricity. Why not a combination of both in the form of electronic board games? If I asked you what the first electronic board game was, you might be tempted to answer Battleship, which was an early adopter of inexpensive microcontrollers like the Texas Instruments TMS 1000. Of course, if you've learned anything from our videos, it's that most of the pastimes and merchandise we enjoyed in the 70s, 80s, and 90s had predecessors that were first introduced long before we were born. Such is the case again with electronic board games, the first of which was, astoundingly, released in 1910. Litra in Germany and sometimes Electra by the 1930s, was a simple quiz game wherein the player would attempt to choose the correct answer or image on the left and right sides of the game board. By placing leads into the provided holes, players would find out if they were correct because a small bulb would light up. Electra was released in various forms, such as Electro Jr., a Bob the Builder edition, Multi-Electro, and a Winnie the Pooh edition until around 2007 when manufacturing ceased. As early as the 30s and through the 50s, there were a number of electronic sports games created by Jim Prentice, like Electric Baseball and Electric Football, though these veer further away from standard board game setups. Two more games that don't quite fit our definition of board games are Simon and Operation. Yet we have to mention them since they too were both early installments, with Operation being first released in 1965 and Simon in 1978. Unlike the rest of our picks for this list, they are better described as memory and dexterity games. Similarly, Merlin, the Electronic Wizard, offered a number of memory games, 6 in all, including Music Machine, Echo, and Magic Square.
I'm Merlin, the Electronic Wizard, challenging you to 6 computer games. Start with simple tic-tac-toe. Your turn, my turn. I'll tell you if you win and when you lose. Play all kinds of games. Echo, Blackjack 13, Magic Square, or formidable Mind Bender, or make beautiful music together. Merlin, the Electronic Wizard from Parker Brothers.
Perhaps the first true electronic board game of our era, or at the very least the one most people think of, was Electronic Battleship, released in 1977. It's of course a lot closer to standard board games than some previous examples, but it also offered more extensive gameplay with a focus on strategy and breathed new life into the already popular game. In the initial version, players manually input the coordinates for each peg space their ships covered, one by one. But subsequent versions mercifully featured 100 pre-programmed board setups that players could load using a short code, speeding up the process considerably. Still, those were the early days of these innovative technologies, released alongside computers like the Apple II and Commodore PET, and consumers were enamored. It would be another 6 years before Talking Battleship graced toy store shelves in 1983 and once again revitalized the game's popularity, adding a way to play against the computer, which further increased gameplay value as well.
Man your battle station.
Man your battle station.
It's Electronic Talking Battleship. So real, it really talks.
Battleship sunk.
Yeah, now you're talking.
Electronic Talking Battleship and Original Battleship, only from Milton Bradley.
Another early entrant into the wild world of electronic games was Stop Thief, created by Robert Doyle and released by Parker Brothers in 1979. Having graduated from Harvard with a doctorate in astrophysics, Doyle first worked at NASA before setting his sights on the gaming industry in the 1970s. Stop Thief wasn't Doyle's first foray into electronic gaming. He's also the mind behind Codename Sector, released in 1977, and both the aforementioned games Electronic Battleship and Merlin. Codename Sector almost plays like a cross between Battleship and Stop Thief, where the player must track an underwater and unseen submarine with the use of the game computer. Similarly, Stop Thief, subtitled Electronic Cops and Robbers, placed you and the other players in the roles of private detectives. Your goal was to catch the computer-controlled and completely invisible robber. Luckily, you had the electronic crime scanner, which allowed you to hear the robber's movements and actions, helping to pinpoint their location.
This is Stop Thief, a computerized cops and robbers game where an electronic crime scanner gives you clues
Door.
to catch an invisible thief.
A broken window.
Footsteps.
In Stop Thief, when you think you know where the thief is, make the arrest.
Here come the cops.
I think he's got him.
9-volt battery not included. Stop Thief, an electronic cops and robbers game, new from Parker Brothers.
Probably one of the best advertising elements of the game was the box itself. Prominently featured on the lid was the crime scanner, which looked like a cross between a walkie-talkie and an early cell phone. Obviously, a huge selling point. The lasting popularity of Stop Thief led to a revitalized re-release from Restoration Games, which was successfully kickstarted in 2017. The newer version uses cell phone apps in place of the crime scanner, which is a cost-effective and clever implementation of available technology, yet circumvents the most loved element of the original game, the crime scanner. Another electronic game revitalized by Restoration Games is Dark Tower, which was first released by Milton Bradley in 1981.
Last night I journeyed backwards in time to the medieval world of Dark Tower. In this amazing game, I had to find 3 keys, lay siege to the tower, and defeat the enemy within. Each move was a challenge. The computer kept track, giving me secret information, pictures, sounds, surprises. Then, ahead of my opponent, I made my move. The battle was joined, and I was victorious. Dark Tower.
In this epic fantasy game, players were tasked with the goal of recovering a magic scepter from the evil king who resides in the Dark Tower. Players explore 4 kingdoms in search of magic keys, which are necessary to get into the Dark Tower. Game movements, inventory, attacks, and nearly everything else is recorded and automated by the interactive electronic tower. As you move from space to space, pressing the necessary membrane keypad on the tower, there are sound effects, a digital readout, and even backlit images displayed to enhance gameplay. Like Stop Thief, the Restoration Games version of this game, Return to Dark Tower, is app-driven, but unlike Stop Thief, this release does still come with the interactive electronic tower element. The Dungeons & Dragons Computer Labyrinth game, released by Mattel Electronics in 1980, was another electronic board game that allowed players to travel to a fantasy world through the use of new technology. In this instance, the toy was less a board game and more of an analog dungeon crawler enhanced with electronic elements. Shortly after discovering the game at a local toy show back in 2022, I dove into a full playthrough and tutorial of the game over on my YouTube channel, Gen X Grown Up. Not unlike some of the other games we've discussed today, this one also relies on the mystery of discovery as you move around the board to reveal where the walls of the maze are and the location of items and enemies, communicated through a series of specific beeps and bloops.
Open your mind to new Dungeons & Dragons computer game from Mattel Electronics. It will lead your imagination down a dungeon labyrinth wherein lies the dragon's treasure. Steal his treasure, but make no false moves. For in Dungeons & Dragons, a dead end is a dead end. New Dungeons & Dragons from Mattel Electronics.
The game has incredible replayability as well, offering 2 modes and randomly created mazes every time you turn on the game. As far as early electronic games go, this one is a favorite. Going now from one of my favorite electronic games to our staff writer's favorite, we present the Omega Virus.
The Omega virus has taken control of the space station's computer.
Help me.
And you have to hunt it down and destroy it.
30 minutes till I take over.
It's Omega Virus, the electronic talking virus hunting game where the computer
Hurry.
and the virus
You fool.
really speak.
Negatron found.
Collect your weapons.
Red sector shut down.
And find the virus. The virus can win.
1 minute.
I think I found it!
You win.
Yeah!
Omega Virus. Catch it before it's too late.
This game is straight out of the 90s with its evocative language, vivid imagery, oversized comic book manual, and evil computer villain who constantly taunts you. The premise revolves around a computer virus that has taken over a space station in the year 2051. The Class A Omega virus has taken aim at Earth with the space station's own lasers, and it's up to highly trained commandos, that's you, to gather 3 antivirus devices, or AVDs, hidden on the space station and destroy the virus. The difficulty level is based around time limits that can be set between 10 and 30 minutes. To find the AVDs, you have to first find colored cards to gain access to different rooms. You can also find a probe, which gives you 2 turns per round. For every move, you type in room codes to explore, and every second counts as the timer never stops. None of this was particularly easy, and the continuous taunts and attacks paired with a dwindling timer made for a sometimes frustrating game, but really, who could stay mad at that sweet voice?
You fool.
Bridging the gap between board games and video games, Milton Bradley released Arcade Mania in 1983.
If yours is a house divided, half the family playing board games and half playing arcade video games, then come together and play Arcade Mania, the game that combines arcade speed with board game strategy. And everyone plays every play. You plan your moves, play your cards, and score points by dodging UFOs, battling aliens, intercepting missiles, or defeating serpents. So get arcade speed with board game strategy in Arcade Mania from Milton Bradley.
The game came with a mini arcade machine that was capable of playing several different games, earning points and tokens as you navigated the board. Though initially entertaining, the interest level can wear thin after having played through a few times. As electronic board games became more prevalent, it wasn't uncommon to see electronic versions of classic games hit the market. We've already mentioned Battleship, and there was also Monopoly, Clue, and Stratego, to name a few. Not only did Monopoly have a couple different iterations, Monopoly Playmaster and Monopoly Stock Exchange, they weren't simply electronic recreations of the original game. Monopoly Playmaster, for instance, was an add-on device meant to be used with your standard game. The device was placed in the middle of the board, and you used it as a dice roller to keep track of player locations and add auctions to gameplay. Monopoly Stock Exchange, which was never released in the US, is a completely new take on the game that adds the functionality of an electronic console that keeps track of turns and information.
Electronic games filled a much-needed gap for gamers in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, allowing for games that felt a little more special than your standard board game, if not quite as advanced as video games. No basement or closet was complete without a stack of board games, and no stack of board games was complete without at least one of the electronic variety. And so, what electronic games were in your stack? Which was your favorite, and which did you absolutely hate? I'd love to hear about it down in the comments, and if you enjoy our content, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and maybe even activating that ubiquitous notification bell. It really does make a huge difference. Let's meet again next week to celebrate Yesteryear right here on RetroDaze.
Clicky clicky.